Guests were still laughing at the cruel jokes about her size when the heavy oak doors of the country club shattered open. Amelia stood frozen, tears ruining her carefully applied makeup, holding the cheap plastic ring her ex-fiancé had just thrown at her feet. Nobody expected the city's most dangerous man to stride through the silent room, ignore the wealthy elite, kneel before the humiliated, curvy woman, and slide a 4-carat diamond onto her trembling finger. Payback had just arrived. Amelia Albright stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the bridal suite, her hands nervously smoothing the expensive olive-green silk of her engagement gown. She was a beautiful woman, with thick, cascading chestnut waves, flawless porcelain skin, and bright hazel eyes, but she was also unequivocally fat. It was a fact she had long ago made peace with, carrying her size 22 frame with a quiet, gentle dignity. She ran a highly successful boutique bakery, poured her heart into her community, and loved with everything she had. Yet over the last 2 years, her fiancé, Gregory Prescott, had systematically chipped away at her hard-won confidence, one passive-aggressive comment at a time. "Are you sure about the cut of that dress, Amelia?" Gregory's voice floated into the room, laced with that familiar, condescending tone. He stood in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed. "It's a bit much. I mean, we talked about you wearing something more slimming for tonight. Black, perhaps? You know how my mother feels about bright colors on larger figures." Amelia swallowed the lump forming in her throat, forcing a small smile. "The seamstress said the empire waist flatters my curves, Gregory, and it's my engagement party, too. I wanted to feel beautiful." Gregory sighed, a harsh, dramatic sound that made Amelia flinch internally. He walked over, his perfectly manicured hands resting lightly on her bare shoulders, his gaze meeting hers in the mirror. "You are beautiful, sweetheart, in your own special way. I just want tonight to be perfect. My family's entire social circle is out there in the ballroom of the Oakfield Country Club. The mayor, the city council, the investors. I just don't want them staring for the wrong reasons." The subtle jab hit its mark, right in the softest part of her insecurities. Gregory had a talent for disguising cruelty as concern. When they first met, he had been charming, sweeping her off her feet with lavish dates and declarations of love. It was only after he discovered the substantial trust fund left to her by her late father, Thomas Albright, that the engagement ring had quickly materialized. Since then, his true colors had slowly bled through the facade. He monitored her meals, made jokes about her weight in front of his slender, affluent friends, and constantly compared her to her stepsister, Chloe Davenport. Chloe was everything Amelia was not. A size 0, blonde, ruthlessly ambitious, and entirely dependent on the Albright wealth to fund her lavish lifestyle. Yet Gregory adored Chloe's company. "I'll be careful tonight, Gregory," Amelia whispered, looking down at the carpet. "I won't embarrass you." "Good girl," he murmured, pressing a cold, perfunctory kiss to her cheek. "Now hurry up. My father wants to introduce us to Arthur Kensington before the champagne toast. And remember, stick to the salad during the dinner service." As Gregory turned and exited the room, Amelia closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She hastily wiped it away, terrified of ruining her makeup. She told herself that Gregory loved her, that this was just how men from his social standing behaved. The Prescotts were old money, though rumors whispered that their fortune was drying up, which was why this engagement was so highly publicized. Amelia was bringing fresh capital into the Prescott empire, though she naively believed she was bringing them love. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Amelia stepped out of the bridal suite and walked down the grand staircase toward the ballroom. The Oakfield Country Club was extravagant, dripping in crystal chandeliers and towering floral arrangements of white roses and orchids. The room was packed with hundreds of the city's most elite residents, their expensive jewelry catching the light as they mingled, drank, and laughed. Amelia felt like an imposter. As she wove through the crowd, she could feel the eyes on her. She heard the hushed whispers behind crystal champagne flutes. That's her, Thomas Albright's daughter? I heard she practically bought the ring herself. Gregory Prescott could have had any model in the city, and he settled for a baker who clearly eats all her own inventory. Amelia kept her chin high, trying to tune out the venomous murmurs. She spotted Gregory standing by the grand piano, laughing loudly at something Chloe had just said. Chloe was wearing a skin-tight silver dress that left nothing to the imagination, her hand resting far too intimately on Gregory's bicep. A pang of jealousy and unease twisted in Amelia's stomach, but she pushed it down. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of their future. She wouldn't let her paranoia ruin it. As she approached them, Gregory's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he smoothly stepped away from Chloe. "Ah, there she is," he announced loudly, drawing the attention of the surrounding circle of aristocrats. "My bride-to-be." Chloe offered Amelia a sickeningly sweet smile, her eyes raking up and down Amelia's curvy figure with undisguised pity. "Amelia, darling, that dress is certainly a choice. It takes a lot of bravery to wear something so bright when you have so much to hide." The surrounding group, including Gregory's snobbish mother, Beatrice, chuckled softly. Amelia felt her cheeks burn hot with shame. "It's a lovely dress, Chloe," Amelia managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you." "Well, let's not linger on fashion choices," Gregory interrupted, clapping his hands together. He grabbed a crystal glass from a passing waiter and tapped a silver spoon against it. Clink, clink, clink. The bright, ringing sound echoed through the massive ballroom. The string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded into expectant silence as hundreds of faces turned toward the grand staircase where Gregory stood, pulling Amelia up one step so they were elevated above the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory's voice boomed, charismatic and smooth. "If I could have your attention, please." Amelia looked up at him, her heart fluttering. Despite the cruelties, despite the coldness, this was the moment he was going to declare his love for her in front of everyone. She squeezed his hand, ready to forgive him for his earlier harsh words. But when Gregory looked down at her, his eyes weren't filled with love. They were filled with a chilling, calculated disgust. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every eye in the affluent crowd was locked on the couple standing on the lower steps of the grand staircase. Gregory held his champagne flute high, a charming, practiced smile plastered across his handsome face. Amelia stood beside him, clutching her hands together in front of her olive-green dress, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Family, friends, distinguished guests," Gregory began, his voice projecting flawlessly across the room. "We are gathered here tonight under the guise of celebrating an engagement, a union between the historic Prescott family and the Albright wealth." Amelia frowned slightly. It was an odd way to phrase it, highlighting her money rather than her family name, but she remained silent, keeping her polite smile fixed in place. "When I first met Amelia," Gregory continued, pacing slightly on the step, turning to address the whole room, "I saw a woman who had a lot to offer. She was generous to a fault, undeniably rich, and possessed a sweet, naive disposition. I thought to myself, Gregory, this is a woman you can mold, a woman you can refine. A few uncomfortable shifts rippled through the crowd, but Gregory's wealthy friends, the ones who had sneered at Amelia all evening, leaned in with malicious interest. I spent 2 years trying to turn her into a woman worthy of the Prescott name. Gregory's voice began to harden, the charming veneer cracking to reveal the sheer cruelty beneath. He turned to look directly at Amelia, his lip curling into a sneer. But you can't put a silk gown on a pig ear and expect it to become a swan. Amelia's breath hitched. The entire ballroom seemed to collectively gasp. She stared at him, her hazel eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Gregory," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sudden, tense silence. "What are you doing?" He ignored her, addressing the crowd with a theatrical shrug. "I realized recently, as the wedding planning began, that I simply couldn't go through with it. I couldn't subject myself to a lifetime of waking up next to someone who takes up twice the space on the bed, someone whose primary relationship is with refined sugar rather than her own fiancé. I mean, look at her." Gregory gestured broadly at Amelia's curvy figure. "She is a walking heart attack, an embarrassment to anyone with a shred of social standing. Did you honestly think, Amelia, that a Prescott would willingly marry a whale?" The words hit Amelia like physical blows. The air vanished from her lungs. The room began to spin. She could hear scattered laughter now, cruel, mocking laughter from Gregory's mother, Beatrice, and from Chloe, who was standing at the front of the crowd, practically vibrating with excitement. "But tonight is not a total loss," Gregory announced, his warm voice rising triumphantly over the murmurs of the crowd. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the exquisite diamond ring that had been sitting on Amelia's finger just hours before, the ring he had demanded she return to him this morning for cleaning. "I am still getting married," Gregory declared. He stepped down from the staircase, completely abandoning Amelia, and walked straight over to Chloe. "To a woman who actually belongs in my world, a woman of grace, beauty, and discipline. Chloe, darling, will you do me the honor?" Chloe feigned a gasp of surprise, covering her mouth with delicate fingers before throwing her arms around Gregory's neck. "Oh, Gregory! Yes, of course I will." The crowd erupted into applause. Gregory's father, Richard Prescott, clapped loudly, beaming with pride. It was a setup. The entire night, the entire engagement, the presence of the city's elite. It had all been a meticulously orchestrated plan to humiliate Amelia publicly, break her spirit, and pivot the alliance to her stepsister, who controlled the other half of the Albright Trust Fund. Amelia stood frozen on the staircase, completely abandoned. The humiliation was a living, breathing entity, wrapping its suffocating hands around her throat. Hundreds of pairs of eyes darted between the newly engaged, glamorous couple and the fat, devastated woman left standing alone on the stairs. Gregory pulled away from Chloe and walked back to the bottom of the staircase, staring up at Amelia with a look of utter contempt. He reached into his other pocket and pulled something out, tossing it casually at Amelia's feet. It bounced off the marble stair with a hollow, plastic clatter. It was a cheap plastic ring from a gumball machine, shaped like a cartoon pig. "That's more your speed, Amelia," Gregory laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Take your pathetic little bakery and your massive appetite and get out of my party. You're ruining the aesthetic." Tears finally spilled over Amelia's lashes, hot and fast, ruining her makeup just as she had feared. Her chest heaved as a full-blown panic attack set in. The walls of the ballroom felt like they were closing in. The laughter of the crowd was a deafening roar in her ears. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She bent down, her trembling fingers brushing against the cold marble as she instinctively, shamefully, picked up the plastic pig ring. She didn't know why she did it. Perhaps her brain was just desperate for something to hold on to anchor her to reality. She took a step back, ready to turn and flee into the night, ready to disappear and never show her face in this city again. She would abandon her bakery, her home, her life. The humiliation was too complete, too absolute. But before she could take another step, the heavy, towering oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom didn't just open. They were violently thrown open, crashing against the interior walls with a sound like a bomb detonating. The laughter died instantly. The string quartet, which had just begun to play a celebratory tune for Gregory and Chloe, screeched to a terrifying halt. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 men in impeccably tailored pitch-black suits, was Lincoln Moretti. Lincoln Moretti was a ghost, a myth, and a nightmare rolled into a staggeringly handsome, terrifyingly dangerous package. He was the undisputed boss of the city's underworld, a man whose legitimate business empire was only a front for a syndicate that controlled the docks, the unions, and the politicians. He rarely made public appearances, preferring to pull the strings from the shadows of his penthouse. He was a man of ruthless calculation, renowned for his icy demeanor, his lethal efficiency, and his absolute intolerance for disrespect. He stood at 6'4", broad-shouldered and imposing, wearing a custom, midnight black 3-piece suit that hugged his athletic frame. His hair was dark and swept back, and his jawline looked like it had been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that froze the blood of everyone in the room. They were a piercing, stormy grey, currently scanning the ballroom with the predatory intensity of a wolf stepping into a pen full of oblivious sheep. Richard Prescott, Gregory's father, visibly paled, his champagne flute slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor. He owed Lincoln Moretti an obscene amount of money, gambling debts that had secretly bankrupted the Prescott family. Richard had promised to pay Lincoln back using Amelia's trust fund upon the marriage. Lincoln stepped into the ballroom. His heavy custom leather shoes clicked ominously against the marble. His men, Vincent, Dominic, and Arthur, fanned out behind him, their hands resting subtly near the lapels of their jackets. The wealthy elite of the city, the mayors, the investors, the snobs who had just been laughing at Amelia, scrambled backward, parting like the Red Sea to create a wide, terrified path for the Mafia boss. Lincoln ignored them all. He didn't look at the mayor. He didn't look at the trembling Richard Prescott. His stormy grey eyes locked immediately onto the grand staircase. He saw Amelia. He saw the tears streaming down her beautiful face, ruining her makeup. He saw her trembling frame, her curves wrapped in the olive-green silk. He saw the cheap plastic pig ring clutched in her shaking hand. A muscle feathered in Lincoln's jaw. A terrifying, silent rage radiated from him in dark waves. Most people didn't know that Lincoln Moretti had a weakness. 7 months ago, Lincoln had been ambushed by a rival faction in the pouring rain. Bleeding heavily from a stab wound to his side, he had staggered through the back alleys of the city, delirious and dying. He had collapsed against the back door of a closed bakery. It was Amelia who had found him. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't called the police, somehow sensing the danger that would bring. Despite him being a terrifying, bleeding stranger, This soft, beautiful, curvy woman had hauled his heavy frame inside, patched his wound with a gentle touch, fed him warm bread, and let him sleep in her office until his men tracked him down the next morning. She had asked for nothing, not even his name, treating him with a pure, unconditional kindness he had never experienced in his violent life. Since that night, Lincoln had watched her from the shadows. He had bought the building her bakery was in to ensure her rent never increased. He had quietly dismantled a rival bakery that tried to steal her recipes. He had become utterly captivated by her radiant smile, her soft curves, and her gentle heart. He had bided his time, knowing a woman of her innocence did not belong in his dark world, telling himself he was just protecting his savior. But as he walked into the Oakfield Country Club to collect the deed to the property from Richard Prescott as payment for the debt, he walked into a public execution of the only woman he had ever cared for. Lincoln walked straight past Gregory and Chloe, not even acknowledging their existence, and ascended the first 2 steps of the staircase. He stopped right in front of Amelia. Amelia looked up at him, her chest heaving, terrified of this giant, dangerous man staring down at her. She didn't recognize him in his expensive suit, fully heeled and commanding the room. Lincoln reached out. His large, warm, calloused hand gently cupped her cheek, his thumb softly wiping away a fresh tear that fell from her hazel eyes. The touch was so startlingly tender that a collective gasp echoed through the terrified ballroom. "Why is my angel crying?" Lincoln's voice was a deep, gravelly rumble, vibrating with a lethal, barely contained fury. Amelia couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a sob escaping her lips. Lincoln gently took her hand, prying her fingers open. He looked at the plastic pig ring she was holding. He picked it up between his thumb and forefinger, examining it for a second before crushing it into pieces in his grip, letting the plastic shards fall to the floor. He turned slowly on the stairs, keeping one protective arm wrapped securely around Amelia's thick waist, pulling her flush against his side. He looked down at Gregory. "You," Lincoln said, his voice deadly quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. Gregory swallowed hard, trying to maintain his bravado. "Mr. Moretti, we weren't expecting you. If this is about my father's debt—" "I don't care about your father's pathetic debt," Lincoln interrupted, his gray eyes narrowing into lethal slits. "I care about why the woman I have been waiting to make mine is crying on a staircase, being humiliated by a boy who isn't fit to kiss the ground she walks on." Gregory stared at him, bewildered. "The woman you mean Amelia? Mr. Moretti, surely you jest. Look at her. She's a—" Before Gregory could finish the insult, Vincent, Lincoln's second in command, moved with blinding speed. He grabbed Gregory by the throat and slammed him violently onto the grand piano. The discordant crash of the piano keys echoed like a gunshot. Chloe screamed, stumbling backward and falling onto the floor. Lincoln didn't even blink at the violence. He kept his attention focused on Amelia, who was staring up at him in shock. "Mr. Moretti?" Amelia whispered her voice trembling. I don't understand." Lincoln looked down at her, the terrifying mask of the Mafia boss melting away to reveal genuine, burning devotion. "You saved my life 7 months ago, Amelia. You thought I was a stray dog in the rain, but you treated me like a king. I promised myself I would stay away to keep you safe. But seeing this," he gestured to the room full of terrified elite, "seeing them blind to the most beautiful, perfect woman in this city, I'm done staying away." Lincoln reached inside his tailored vest. He didn't pull out a gun. Instead, he pulled out a sleek, black velvet box. He pressed a button, and it popped open. Resting inside was a flawless 4-carat, emerald-cut diamond ring, surrounded by a halo of crushed sapphires. It was a ring fit for royalty, worth more than the entire Prescott estate. Lincoln Moretti, the ruthless king of the underworld, stepped down one stair so he was lower than Amelia. Slowly, deliberately, he sank onto one knee on the marble staircase. "Amelia Albright," Lincoln said, his voice loud enough for every single person who had mocked her to hear. "You are the only woman worthy of standing by my side. You are perfect exactly as you are. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you what a real man looks like. Marry me." The silence in the room was deafening. Gregory was gasping for air against the piano, his eyes bulging in terror and disbelief. Chloe was weeping on the floor. Beatrice and Richard Prescott looked like they were going to faint. Amelia stared at the massive diamond, then at the impossibly handsome, dangerous man kneeling before her. The man who saw her curves not as a flaw to be fixed, but as perfection to be worshipped. Slowly, a genuine, radiant smile broke through her tears. She nodded, extending her trembling left hand. "Yes." Lincoln's stormy eyes lit up with a triumphant fire. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles, and slid the massive diamond onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood up, wrapping both arms around her waist, pulling her against his chest, and kissed her deeply, fiercely, in front of everyone who had just tried to destroy her. Payback hadn't just arrived. It had placed a crown on her head. Leaving the Oakfield Country Club felt like stepping out of a suffocating nightmare and into a strange, exhilarating dream. Flashbulbs from local paparazzi, tipped off about the high society engagement, illuminated the damp night air as Lincoln guided Amelia through the front doors. He kept his large, protective frame wrapped tightly around her, shielding her from the intrusive cameras and shouted questions. Vincent and Arthur, Lincoln's loyal enforcers, flanked them with practiced precision, shoving aggressive photographers aside until they reached the idling, bulletproof Mercedes Maybach waiting at the curb. Once inside the plush, leather-scented interior of the vehicle, the heavy doors closed, instantly muting the chaos of the outside world. Amelia collapsed against the seat, her entire body trembling as the adrenaline finally began to drain from her system. She looked down at her left hand. The heavy, 4-carat emerald-cut diamond caught the ambient streetlights, sparkling with a mocking brilliance. It felt like an anchor tying her to a reality she couldn't quite comprehend. Lincoln sat beside her, the intimidating aura of the Mafia boss softening the moment they were alone. He reached over, his large fingers gently enveloping her shaking hands. He wore a heavy gold Cartier watch that peeked out from his tailored cuff, a stark reminder of the immense wealth and power this man wielded. "Breathe, Amelia," Lincoln murmured, his deep voice wrapping around her like a warm blanket. "You are safe. No one will ever speak to you like that again. I swear it on my life." Amelia looked up into his stormy grey eyes, searching for the catch, the punchline to a joke she wasn't in on. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Gregory was right about one thing. I don't belong in that world, and I certainly don't belong in yours, Mr. Moretti. I am just a baker. She swallowed hard, the cruel words of the evening echoing in her ears. "I'm not the kind of woman a man like you marries." Lincoln's jaw tightened, a flash of lethal anger crossing his features, not directed at her, but at the man who had planted such toxic seeds in her mind. He slid closer, erasing the distance between them, and cupped her face. Never repeat the words of a coward, Lincoln commanded softly, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Gregory Prescott is a boy playing dress-up with Daddy's dying bank accounts. He wanted to break you so he could control the Albright Trust. He wanted you small in every sense of the word, because your spirit intimidated him. Lincoln's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes, burning with undeniable heat. When I look at you, Amelia, I see a queen. I see the woman who dragged a bleeding stranger into her bakery and stayed up all night pressing towels to his wound, asking for absolutely nothing in return. Your curves, your softness, your beautiful body. It is perfection. I do not want a stick-thin socialite who only cares about her reflection. I want you. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes again. But this time, they were tears of profound relief. For 2 years, she had starved herself, shrunk herself, and apologized for her mere existence. To hear this powerful, terrifyingly handsome man worship the very things she had been taught to hate about herself broke the final dam around her heart. The Maybach smoothly pulled into the secure underground garage of the St. Regis residential tower, where Lincoln owned the sprawling top-floor penthouse. After a silent elevator ride that required a biometric scan to operate, the polished steel doors opened directly into a magnificent glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the glittering city skyline. "Welcome home, Mia Dolcezza," Lincoln said, leading her inside. The first thing Lincoln did was order her to take off the restrictive heels that were pinching her feet. The second thing he did was completely shatter Gregory's abusive dietary rules. "Vincent," Lincoln called out to his second-in-command, who had followed them up. "Call Le Bernardin. Have them send up the tasting menu. Everything. And make sure they include the truffled risotto and the chocolate souffle." Amelia gasped softly. "Lincoln, it's past midnight, and that's so much food." "Gregory always said I shouldn't eat after 6. Lincoln stopped dead in his tracks. He turned to her, his expression a mix of sorrow and fierce determination. He stepped into her space, his hands resting heavily on her wide hips, gripping the olive-green silk. "Gregory is dead to us," Lincoln stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "In this house, you eat what you want, when you want. You nourish this beautiful body, Amelia. You will never go hungry, and you will never apologize for taking up space. Do you understand me?" A shiver of pure desire ran down her spine at his dominant, yet deeply caring tone. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Lincoln." Later that night, sitting on a massive velvet sofa overlooking the city, Amelia ate the most incredible meal of her life, wearing one of Lincoln's oversized black dress shirts. He sat beside her, sipping a glass of aged Macallan, watching her eat with an expression of sheer adoration. He didn't look at her like she was a project to be fixed. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. For the first time in years, Amelia didn't feel ashamed of her appetite or her size. She felt cherished. She felt powerful. Panic was a bitter, metallic taste in Gregory Prescott's mouth. He paced the length of his father's opulent, oak-paneled study, running his hands through his perfectly styled blonde hair until it stood on end in frantic spikes. The morning papers were scattered across the mahogany desk, and every single one featured front-page photos of Lincoln Moretti putting a 4-carat ring on Amelia's finger. "Mafia King claims bakery heiress," screamed one headline. "Prescott disgraced at own engagement party," read another. "It's gone. It's all gone," Richard Prescott groaned, burying his face in his hands. He looked 10 years older than he had the previous night. "Goldman Sachs called this morning, Gregory. They are accelerating the collection on the estate's loans, and without Amelia's trust fund to collateralize our debt. We have Chloe's half, Gregory snapped, pointing a trembling finger toward the hallway, where Chloe was currently screaming at a maid over a spilled latte. Chloe is a Albright too. Chloe's trust doesn't vest until she turns 30, or until she marries someone with an equal net worth, Richard snapped back, his eyes bloodshot. We are practically bankrupt, Gregory. JP Morgan won't clear the merger without liquid capital. And worse, I owe Lincoln Moretti $4 million. I promised him Amelia's immediate liquid assets. You publicly humiliated the woman Lincoln Moretti is in love with. He is going to kill us all. Gregory stopped pacing, a cold, desperate sweat breaking out on his neck. His arrogance had completely blinded him. He had thought Amelia was a pathetic, lonely woman who would crawl away and hide after he destroyed her. He never imagined she had the city's most lethal predator waiting in the wings to catch her. We need leverage, Gregory muttered, his eyes darting around the room as his mind raced. If we can get Amelia back, if we can separate her from Moretti, even for a few hours, I can convince her to sign the emergency proxy forms for the JP Morgan accounts. She's weak, Dad. She's fat, pathetic, and insecure. Moretti is just using her for a front. I know it. Once she's away from him, I can manipulate her again. Richard looked at his son like he was insane. Are you deaf? She is flanked by armed mobsters. Not inside her bakery, Gregory countered, a sinister plan forming in his mind. Amelia is obsessed with that stupid shop, the Sugar Blossom. She won't let Moretti's thugs stand behind the pastry counter and scare off the suburban moms. She'll insist on normalcy. We just need someone who isn't afraid of Lincoln to grab her. Gregory pulled out his phone and scrolled to a heavily encrypted number he had acquired during his darker gambling days. He hit dial. He was calling Declan Fitzgerald, the ruthless head of the West Side Irish Syndicate, a man who had been bleeding territory to Lincoln Moretti for 3 years and was desperate for a bargaining chip. Across town, the warm, comforting scent of vanilla extract and baking yeast filled the air of the Sugar Blossom. Amelia, dressed in a custom, plus-sized white baker's apron over a comfortable floral dress, was up to her elbows in flour. Kneading dough had always been her therapy, and after the chaotic whiplash of the previous night, she desperately needed the grounding rhythm of her work. Lincoln had been completely against her going to work, but Amelia had firmly, yet gently, insisted. I won't let Gregory steal my pride, and I won't let him steal my routine, she had told Lincoln that morning, adjusting his silk tie before leaving the penthouse. Lincoln had sighed, kissed her forehead, and compromised by placing 4 of his best men in unmarked cars outside the bakery, with Vincent sitting quietly at a corner table inside, sipping an espresso and reading the Wall Street Journal. Amelia was just pulling a tray of Valrhona chocolate croissants from the commercial oven when the bell above the bakery door violently jingled. She turned around, wiping her brow with the back of her flour-covered hand, and froze. 4 men, built like brick walls and wearing scuffed leather jackets, stormed into the shop. They didn't look like Lincoln's tailored professional guards. These men were rough, scarred, and radiated chaotic violence. Leading them was Declan Fitzgerald, a man with cold, dead eyes and a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The few morning customers shrieked and scrambled toward the walls. Amelia Albright, Declan announced, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. You're coming with us. Prescott wants a chat, and I want a word with your new fiancé. Vincent was moving before Declan even finished his sentence. The suave enforcer dropped his newspaper, drawing a suppressed Heckler & Koch pistol from beneath his jacket in a blur of motion. Thwack! Thwack! 2 suppressed shots took down the men flanking Declan, hitting them perfectly in the knees. They screamed, collapsing onto the pastel-tiled floor of the bakery, but there were too many of them. Declan and his remaining enforcer lunged forward, overturning tables and display cases, sending shattered glass and delicate pastries flying through the air. Vincent tackled the enforcer, sending them both crashing into the espresso machine, leaving Declan a clear path to the counter. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, the metallic taste of fear flooding her mouth. Declan vaulted over the front counter, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass, a switchblade snapping open in his hand. He lunged toward her, reaching for her hair. But Amelia was no longer the shrinking, terrified woman from the country club. The love and validation she had received the night before had awakened a dormant fire inside her. She wasn't just a fat baker anymore. She was the chosen queen of a king. As Declan reached for her, Amelia didn't cower. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron baking tray, still blazing hot from the 400-degree oven, and swung it with all her considerable strength. The heavy metal connected squarely with Declan's face with a sickening crunch. The searing heat of the pan burned his skin instantly. Declan howled in absolute agony, dropping his knife and clutching his ruined face, staggering backward and slipping on a puddle of spilled milk. Before Declan could recover, the back door of the bakery was kicked off its hinges with explosive force. Lincoln Moretti stood in the doorway, an absolute vision of lethal, uncontrolled fury. He had tracked her phone's sudden panic button signal. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal dark tattoos, and he was holding a heavy desert eagle in his right hand. His stormy grey eyes swept the ruined bakery, instantly cataloguing the neutralized threats. Vincent fighting on the floor, and Declan Fitzgerald writhing in pain near the counter. But his eyes locked onto Amelia, who was standing tall, chest heaving, holding the dented cast-iron pan like a battle axe. Lincoln stepped over Declan's thrashing body, not even bothering to look down as he casually kicked the switchblade away. He walked straight to Amelia, gently taking the hot pan from her trembling hands and tossing it onto a steel counter. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her flour-dusted hair. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. "No," Amelia breathed, wrapping her arms tightly around his solid waist, inhaling the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with gunpowder. "I protected our bakery, Lincoln." Lincoln pulled back, looking at her flushed face, his eyes burning with an obsessive, fiercely proud light. He turned his head slowly to look down at Declan, who was moaning on the floor. "Vincent," Lincoln commanded, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper. "Clean up this mess. Bring Fitzgerald to the warehouse, and find out exactly who paid him to walk into my woman's shop." Lincoln turned back to Amelia, sweeping her effortlessly up into his arms, completely indifferent to the flour ruining his expensive clothing. "Gregory Prescott crossed a line today," Lincoln stated, his jaw set like stone as he carried her out of the ruined bakery and into the bright morning sun. "And now I am going to erase him from this earth." Retribution moved swiftly, carrying the cold, calculating precision that had made Lincoln Moretti the most feared man in the city. Inside the dimly lit, soundproofed office of Lincoln's dockside warehouse, Declan Fitzgerald was currently strapped to a steel chair, his burned face wrapped in bandages. He had sung like a canary after merely 10 minutes of Vincent's enhanced interrogation techniques. The audio recording of Declan confessing that Gregory Prescott had hired him to kidnap Amelia was now safely downloaded onto an encrypted flash drive. Lincoln sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his tailored sleeves still rolled up, his stormy eyes reflecting the glow of his laptop screen. He wasn't just going to kill Gregory. Death was too quick, too merciful for a man who had tried to break Amelia's spirit and steal her sense of safety. Lincoln was going to completely dismantle Gregory's existence. He picked up his phone and dialed a private number. It was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Moretti," the trembling voice of Winston Abernathy, the regional director of J.P. Morgan, echoed through the speaker. "Winston," Lincoln said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The Prescott estate. I want every line of credit frozen. I want the immediate acceleration of all their commercial loans. I know Richard Prescott used fraudulent shell companies in the Cayman Islands to artificially inflate his asset sheets. I am sending you the proof now." "Sir, if we do that without a federal audit, the SEC will—" "Winston," Lincoln interrupted softly, the threat hanging heavy in the air. "Do you enjoy your summer home in the Hamptons? Because my associates could easily turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning." Winston swallowed loudly. "Consider the accounts frozen, Mr. Moretti. The Prescotts will be penniless by noon." "Excellent," Lincoln murmured, hanging up. He immediately dialed another number. This time it was Harrison Caldwell, the city's corrupt mayor. "Harrison, the zoning permits for the Prescott family's new downtown development. Revoke them, cite structural violations, and send the health inspector to every restaurant they hold a stake in." Within 3 hours, the Prescott empire collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Across the city, inside the rapidly emptying Prescott mansion, Gregory was frantically stuffing designer clothes and stacks of hidden cash into a leather duffel bag. His phone had not stopped ringing. The bank had seized his credit cards. The country club had officially revoked his membership. His father, Richard, had just been hauled away in handcuffs by the FBI for massive wire fraud, tipped off by an anonymous source with impeccably detailed ledger files. "We have to go, Chloe!" Gregory shouted, zipping the bag. Chloe Davenport stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, her arms crossed over her slender chest. She was wearing a designer trench coat, her bags already packed by the door. But she wasn't looking at Gregory with the adoration she usually faked. She looked at him with sheer disgust. "I am not going anywhere with you, Gregory," Chloe sneered, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You're broke. You're a fugitive. And worse, you crossed Lincoln Moretti. You are a dead man walking." "We are in this together," Gregory panicked, stepping toward her. "You helped me plan the engagement stunt. You wanted her half of the trust fund just as much as I did." "But I didn't hire the Irish mob to shoot up a bakery," Chloe retorted sharply. "That was your brilliant, idiotic move." "I have a meeting." "A meeting? With who?" "With Lincoln," Chloe said, a wicked, delusional smile spreading across her face. "He's a man who appreciates power. I'm going to offer him the other half of the Albright Trust in exchange for my immunity. Once he sees what a real, fit woman looks like, he'll drop that fat cow Amelia in a heartbeat." Gregory stared at her, horrified by her betrayal. But before he could argue, the front doors of the mansion were kicked open with a thunderous crash. The heavy boots of Lincoln's enforcers echoed in the marble foyer. Chloe smirked, turning and walking gracefully down the grand staircase, fully expecting to charm the Mafia boss. She found Lincoln standing in the foyer, surrounded by 6 armed men. He looked like an apex predator, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, his gaze sweeping the luxurious home with utter disdain. "Mr. Moretti," Chloe purred, unbuttoning her trench coat slightly to reveal a low-cut designer dress. She sashayed toward him, putting on her most seductive smile. I'm so glad you're here. Gregory is upstairs. He forced me to go along with his plans, you know. I can be a very valuable asset to you. I have money, connections, and unlike my pathetic stepsister, I actually know how to please a real man. Lincoln didn't blink. He didn't even look at her body. His stormy eyes fixed on her face with a look of such absolute, freezing contempt that Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her fake smile faltering. You, Lincoln said, his voice a low, lethal hum, are the parasite who told Amelia she was taking up too much space. Chloe swallowed hard, suddenly realizing she had gravely miscalculated. I was just giving her fashion advice. Vincent, Lincoln didn't look away from Chloe. Take everything she owns. Empty her trust fund into Amelia's accounts. If she tries to keep so much as a pair of designer shoes, break her legs and leave her in the slums. Wait, no, Chloe shrieked as two massive enforcers grabbed her by the arms, dragging her toward the door. You can't do this. I'm a Davenport. You are nothing, Lincoln stated coldly, before turning his attention to the top of the stairs, where Gregory was trying to sneak toward the back servants' exit. Going somewhere, Gregory? Lincoln's voice echoed through the massive foyer, freezing the disgraced air in his tracks. Gregory dropped his duffel bag, raising his hands in terror as Vincent and Arthur bounded up the stairs, grabbing him by the collar and dragging him down to Lincoln's feet. Gregory fell to his knees, weeping openly, the arrogant facade completely shattered. Please, Mr. Moretti, Gregory sobbed, clutching at Lincoln's tailored pant leg. I'll leave the country. You'll never see me again. Just spare my life. Lincoln kicked Gregory's hands away, stepping back in disgust. I am not going to kill you, Gregory. That would be a mercy. I am going to let you live a long, miserable life. Lincoln leaned down, grabbing Gregory by the hair and forcing him to look into his terrifying grey eyes. Your father is going to federal prison for the rest of his life, Lincoln whispered, ensuring every word cut deep. Your family name is toxic. You have exactly $0 to your name. I have bought every property you ever owned. I even bought the diamond you proposed to Chloe with, just to throw it into the river. You will spend the rest of your pathetic existence working minimum wage, scrubbing toilets, and looking over your shoulder. Because if you ever come within 100 miles of my fiancé again, I will feed you to the stray dogs. Lincoln stood up, adjusting his cuffs perfectly. He looked at Vincent. Throw him out on the street, without his shoes. 6 months later, the city had undergone a monumental shift. The Prescott name was nothing but a cautionary tale whispered among the elite, while the Albright name had been elevated to absolute royalty. The Sugar Blossom Bakery had not only been repaired, it had been expanded. Lincoln had bought the entire city block, allowing Amelia to open a massive, state-of-the-art culinary school for underprivileged youth right next door to her flagship store. She no longer hid in the back kitchen. She proudly stood at the front counter, radiating joy and confidence, greeting the miles-long line of customers who flocked to the most famous bakery in the state. But today, the bakery was closed. Today, the Grand Cathedral in the heart of the city was entirely cordoned off by Lincoln's security personnel. The streets were lined with onlookers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the wedding of the century. Inside the bridal suite of the cathedral, Amelia stood before a towering antique mirror. She was breathing heavily, but this time it was from sheer excitement. She looked absolutely breathtaking. She had refused to diet. She had refused to shrink herself. Instead, she had commissioned a world-renowned Italian designer, a personal friend of Lincoln's, to create a dress that worshipped her body. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and vintage lace. It featured a sweetheart neckline that perfectly framed her generous curves, pulling in tightly at her waist before cascading into a dramatic, sweeping train embroidered with thousands of tiny pearls. Her thick chestnut hair was styled in romantic, tumbling waves, pinned back with a diamond tiara that Lincoln had gifted her on their 1-month anniversary. "You look like a goddess, Amelia," her head baker and best friend, Sarah, whispered, wiping away a tear as she adjusted the veil. Amelia smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up the room. "I feel like one," she admitted softly. The heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary swung open, and the majestic chords of the organ filled the massive, vaulted space. As Amelia walked down the aisle, escorted by the city's new, highly vetted mayor, the entire congregation stood in awe. Standing at the altar was Lincoln Moretti. The ruthless Mafia king looked wildly out of place in a church, yet he commanded the room with an undeniable gravitational pull. He wore a bespoke white tuxedo jacket with black lapels, a stark contrast to his usual dark attire. As he saw Amelia walking toward him, the cold, impenetrable mask he wore for the world completely dissolved. His stormy grey eyes filled with a blinding, absolute devotion. He didn't care about the hundreds of guests, the politicians, or his syndicate captains sitting in the pews. He only saw the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had brought light into his violent, shadowed world. When Amelia reached the altar, Lincoln stepped forward, dismissing her escort with a sharp nod. He took both of Amelia's hands in his, bringing them to his lips and kissing her knuckles tenderly. "You are a vision, Maya Regina," Lincoln whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not deserve you, but I will spend my last breath protecting you." The priest began the ceremony, but Amelia barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Lincoln's gaze. When it was time for their personal vows, Lincoln reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He didn't read from it. He simply held it as a grounding mechanism. "Amelia." Lincoln's deep voice resonated through the silent cathedral. "I lived my entire life in the dark. I built an empire on fear and control. I thought that was all the world had to offer a man like me. But then I stumbled into your light." He paused, his thumb gently caressing the back of her hand. "You loved me when I was broken. You showed me a kindness I had never known. For years you were told that you were not enough, that you were too much. But standing here today, before God and everyone in this city, I swear to you, your heart, your spirit, your beautiful body, it is my entire world. You are my sanctuary. You are my queen. I will love you, fiercely and exclusively, for the rest of my days." Tears of pure joy spilled over Amelia's lashes. She didn't bother wiping them away. "Lincoln," she began, her voice steady and full of profound strength. "You saw me when the world tried to make me invisible. You didn't ask me to change. You demanded that I embrace who I am. You gave me back my voice, my courage, and my bakery." A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd at the mention of her beloved shop. "I love the man you are to the world, and I love the gentle soul you show only to me. I am yours, completely and forever." Lincoln didn't wait for the priest to pronounce them husband and wife. He pulled Amelia flush against his chest, wrapping his powerful arms around her waist, and captured her lips in a deep, passionate, breath-stealing kiss. The cathedral erupted in thunderous applause, shaking the very foundations of the historic building. Far away from the ringing bells and the falling rose petals, in the grimy, rain-slicked alleyway behind a dive bar on the outskirts of the city. A man wearing a stained uniform was hauling trash bags into a dumpster. Gregory Prescott wiped the grease and sweat from his forehead, his hands blistered and raw. He was thin, sickly, and perpetually terrified, jumping at every shadow that moved in the alleyway. He looked up at the small, flickering television screen, visible through the dirty window of the bar. The news anchor was smiling brightly, discussing the stunning royal wedding of Lincoln Moretti and Amelia Albright. The screen flashed a high-definition photo of Lincoln holding Amelia, looking at her with a love so fierce and protective it made Gregory's stomach churn with bitter, agonizing regret. Gregory had tried to break her to elevate himself. Instead, he had handed her the keys to an absolute empire and orchestrated his own descent into hell. Back at the reception, held in the breathtaking ballroom of the St. Regis penthouse, Amelia and Lincoln swayed perfectly in sync on the dance floor. The jazz band played a slow, sultry tune. Amelia rested her head against Lincoln's broad chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "Are you happy, Mrs. Moretti?" Lincoln murmured into her hair, his hands securely resting on her soft, wide hips. Pulling her as close as physically possible, Amelia looked up at him, her hazel eyes sparkling with absolute, unshakable confidence. She was a successful businesswoman, a philanthropist, and the fiercely beloved wife of the city's most powerful man. "I've never been hungrier for the future, Lincoln," Amelia smiled, leaning up to kiss him. "And for the first time in my life, I'm going to eat exactly what I want. Thank you for reading this incredible story of revenge, redemption, and absolute true love." If you loved seeing Amelia get the beautiful happily ever after she deserved and watching Gregory get exactly what was coming to him, please smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good mafia romance drama with a strong, curvy heroine, and hit subscribe for more amazing, dramatic stories delivered straight to you. Leave a comment below telling me your favorite twist from the story.